to my 2020 November overview video, where we're going to be exploring some of the astrology of the month. So if you don't know who I am, my name's Cassandra. I'm an astrologer. I'm from Australia, and you can find out more about me on my website over at cassandratyndall.com. So I'm going to highlight a few of the more dominant, or what I anticipate to be more of the dominant energies of this month, to help guide and inform you of what you can expect as we move forward. If you would like more detailed video content, each aspect as we go from week to week each month, you can join my Golden Circle Club, and the details for that is in the description below. So we are entering the month of November under the influence of a very potent and disruptive change-infused lunation, which is the full moon in Taurus. So that happened at 8 degrees, conjoined, so the full moon in Taurus, conjoined Uranus in Taurus, really kind of sets things with a bang. So as I record this video, it's actually the 31st, it's Halloween here in the Southern Hemisphere. It's hot, it's humid, and then there's a huge storm brewing and rolling in. So if you hear some clanging and banging outside, that's what that's all about. So, you know, this is happening under the influence of Halloween, and depending on your ideals or beliefs around that, you know, the veil is said to become thinner at this point in time. And it's a time where we can communicate more clearly with our ancestors, or they're trying to at least communicate with us. So as the full moon, you know, which is very much about our instincts, it's linked to the past, our bodies, you know, and particularly our mothers, you know, conjoined Uranus, you might become privy to some awakenings or memories or insights around the past, the present, and the future as well. The full moon in Taurus in of itself, the full moon in Taurus is in a sign of which it's exalted. So it's really comfortable for the moon. It's really where we can get comfort, you know, something that's reliable, safe, solid, nurturing, a part of our life. You know, in our birth charts, we all have a house that is ruled by Taurus. So even if you don't have, if you're not a Taurus, you don't have planets in Taurus or angles, we all have a house ruled by that sign, which is where the full moon is. And so this is an area of life that you usually depend on to be solid, stable, reliable. But it's an area of life that is going through some profound change through Uranus's tour of Taurus, which will last till about 2025. But this full moon is really signaling that. So it's a really good time as the month begins, is to perhaps reflect on that area of your life. It won't necessarily be comfortable reflections, but it might sort of, this full moon might set off the month that will give you like the shake up that you maybe didn't know that you needed. It may not necessarily be comfortable or welcome, but it might be, you know, that change is as good as a holiday type of influence where once the dust settles, you're like, oh, this is actually not so bad after all. So it's always like that idea of, oh, you try this thing and you're reluctant to the idea of trying it, and then you're trying it and you're like, oh, that was okay. So that's sort of how we're like entering the month. The month of November is also infused, well, the first week of it at least, is infused with the energy of Mercury, our planet of communication, of language, and what have you, is squaring Saturn. Now, what's happening is that Mercury is retrograde, and it is about to station on the 3rd in Australia and in the USA and Canada, and it's going to station. It's going to then come back and hit Saturn again. So we're in this extended square energy of Mercury square Saturn, which is kind of unique in the way that this is happening, to have this extension. So before we break that down a little bit more, we are under huge cardinal energy right now. You know, we do have, obviously the lights are still in fixed signs because of the full moon there. This moon is still in Taurus. But what we do have is we have, you know, Mars, we have Saturn, Jupiter, you know, Pluto as well, Mercury, or so Venus and Mercury, all in cardinal signs. So there is this energy as we start the month that we want to push forward with something. We want to take action on something. Cardinal energy is dynamic. It likes change. It's this idea of cardinal signs don't even care about how fast the wheels are turning as long as they don't stop. So there's this idea of progress and action. I often think of the Michael Jackson song, You Gotta Be Starting Something. It's very cardinal, always wanting to start something. But with the influence of the full moon still really strong right now, there's this sense of like maybe being held back with something, or things taking longer, or I want to start something, but I'm kind of stuck in the process of doing it, or I'm not sure what that is. And then we enter the Mercury Saturn piece as well. So that's kind of making that even a little bit more influential. So what happens is, as I progress the chart along, so this is technically the 2nd of November here in Australia. This aspect perfects in the Northern Hemisphere as the month begins on the 1st. So Mercury then stations direct on the 3rd, and we all know that that's a very important day in the world. So not only is it the presidential election day, but also we've just had an election here in Australia, like in my home state of Queensland. So there may be some delays around that too. It'll be just really interesting to see how that pans out, particularly when we have Saturn in Capricorn, is very indicative of power, authority, judges, governments, people in positions of authority. So your Mercury coming along and squaring that, it might mean something along the lines of, votes being held up or miscalculated, or something sort of drawn out. And so Mercury stations, and that's really intensifying the themes of Mercury. And then it continues on, and then it will square Saturn again come the 6th. So here we are with the 6th, and we've got Mercury squaring Saturn again. And this is really that's when it becomes exact, is like the 1st and the 2nd, and again on the 6th. But that influence is sort of still in orb, or it's still being energized really until Mercury gets into Scorpio, which happens on the 10th here in Australia, and the 11th, the 10th in the US, and the 11th down here. So when we're looking at Mercury square Saturn, when I see these two planets configured, I often think about deals and details. Like it's this idea of fact checking, I dotting, T crossing, all of those sort of things. And what this aspect really also does, it kind of, what makes it, this particular one a little bit different, is that we've had the ongoing influence of Mercury in retrograde in Scorpio in orb to opposing Uranus. It's coming back again to square Saturn. And then when Mercury goes back into Scorpio again, it's back to Uranus. So we've kind of got this, Mercury is bouncing back between the influence of Saturn and Uranus, and Saturn and Uranus kind of thing. So there is this chaos and order, then chaos. And there's this, Mercury is just trying to be the messenger, trying to get that message across. And do I try and do it in a structured, orderly fashion, or do I try and, throw some bullets in the fire kind of thing? So this week, at least, as we go into the squares, into the Mercury station, which is also like really more intensified and held back and pulled back, it really is an idea about fact checking. Before you give voice to something, or before you sign something, before you spread the message, or whatever that thing is, the idea of taking it slowly, or being sure that what you have to say is fair, is just, maybe kind, bringing some of those Libran themes in. Now, there is a little quirk to this particular influence, is because in the sign of Libra, Saturn finds its exaltation. So there's a kind of a friendship or an affinity that Mercury can make with Saturn. So there is a sense of an agreement. It might be a little bit of argy-bargy or back and forwarding, or having to make some compromises that may not necessarily feel good, or, you know, this agree to disagree kind of influence there. So that might be highlighted throughout the first week in particular of the month. So yeah, I'll leave it there with the Mercury stuff. So that's just something to, you know, keep in mind with all your mercurial, Mercury related things. So that would be obviously communication, money, your emails, your traveling, whether it's just, you know, your everyday stuff, you know, your thoughts, your speech, your communication, all that sort of stuff. It's like maybe turn the filter between brain and tongue right up to 10 and think about what you're saying, and make compromises where possible. So the next thing I really want to bring to your attention or your awareness for the month of November is the next kind of cab off the rank is the conjunction between Jupiter and Pluto. So Jupiter and Pluto has been one of the signature aspects or the signature influences for the year of 2020. So this brings us to the third and final conjunction between these two planets. We had the first in April, the second in June when Jupiter was retrograde, and now we've got the third and final influence of that. One thing that really became obvious of how this was going to play out is kind of two things, and they're not disconnected from each other. First one, the sort of COVID, you know, April kind of really was a peak month of crackdowns and lockdowns, particularly when you think about Jupiter, big things, large group gatherings, the ability to travel and expand, you know, all just became very closed in and shut down. And then, of course, another thing that was happening was massive stimulus packages. Like the government was just handing out money, like it was, you know, candy on Halloween. And Jupiter and Pluto together are a real signature of massive wealth, massive money. You know, some of the world's, you know, most known billionaires are, you know, have Jupiter tight Jupiter Pluto influences in their chart. And so one of the key differences with the one in June when Jupiter was retrograde, there was more talk of more stimulus packages, or talk of when they were going to end at least. And that was kind of earmarked for September. And so this was like maybe the gifts from the government being withdrawn or held back or something along of those lines. And now we are coming into the energy of this, these two planets becoming intensified again. Just in the last couple of days, I have seen things, you know, particularly in Australia, about some of our big billionaires in Australia, just how their wealth has grown exponentially in this particular financial period, you know, 2020. So it's almost like this trickle down economy system that we do live in. It's almost like somehow this year that trickle down has defied gravity. And, you know, that kind of polarizing difference between massive wealth and a lack of wealth has been really quite obvious. So it is very polarizing, this aspect. It's very much about beliefs, conspiracy theories, and all of the things that kind of draw out, you know, from the depths, Pluto, when there is a lack of hope or inspiration, or general benefic or beneficial qualities, which it comes from Jupiter. So that's something to watch for as this month, you know, continues. And on a personal level, of course, look to, you know, some of the Capricorn energies in your chart, and what insights have you mined? Maybe what buried treasures of reservoirs of influence or power that you've been able to pull out from your own life, and maybe using that as some type of fuel or resilience to move forward through this final square. Okay, so that's that one. The next real potent influence of this month is Mars stationing direct. Yay! So that happens on Friday the 13th over all time zones, and that is Mars finally coming to a station. So I'm just going to forward my solar fire here by hours. And so this is the the day, the 13th, where Mars finally starts to slow right down, station, and change direction. So this could potentially be one of the more frustrating components of the whole cycle. The reason for that is it is the real quintessential, the light at the end of the tunnel type of vibe there. Mars wants to go fast. In Aries, it wants to win. So it's sort of like, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, you know, and that might be the end of 2020 for most of us, but it's this idea of here of still having to pace yourself. You know, there's still not much fuel in the tank. Mars is very slow. It only moves 2 degrees for the entirety of the month. So that is like 15, 16 Aries. So if you have planets or points around 15, 16 of the cardinal signs, this is going to be a pullback energy. When it comes to Mars retrograde, I so much think of the idea, the quote from Abraham Lincoln, you know, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree. I'll spend 4 sharpening my axe. And so right now the axe should be really sharp. The tree is almost cut down. And once that tree is down, what are you going to do with it? What's the next thing? I saw something online recently, and the quote was about, you know, everyone wants success, but nobody wants to bleed for it. You know, you bleed for success, you bleed for happiness, you bleed for true relationships, you bleed for visibility or vulnerability. Everything you've got to give blood for something. And the reverse is true. If you don't bleed for something, you'll bleed for that, you know, like for not doing the thing. And I found that an interesting thing because, you know, Mars Aries is about blood and the idea of cutting. So what is it that you may need to make a choice around? What do you need to cut away? What decisions, what choices, what action do you need to take now that you've had those wonderful, hopefully, or deep or meaningful or insightful axe sharpening moments? So it's like, okay, you know, where do I want to wield my sword? Where am I willing to give blood? Where am I willing to maybe make some sacrifices? Because obviously when you cut something, there's 2 and you have to do away with one thing and go in the direction of another. Mars moving only like very slowly this month. It is a really ideal time to perhaps work out those steps that you want to take, not only now in this month, but also in, you know, the rest of 2020 and into 2021. So I really do invite you to spend a little bit of time under that station to really do contemplate your personal events of the last few months, and also to think about where you want to go moving forward. We also have a new moon on the 15th. So the new moon on the 15th, that happens, I believe, just double checking all of my notes here, in all time zones. So that's at 23 degrees of Scorpio. So the moon is just about to catch up to the sun there. So we've got a new moon, 23 Scorpio, and its ruler Mars is now direct. And Mercury is also in Scorpio. So this is a pretty potent lunation for deciding, you know, the whole Mars thing. Maybe going into that deep dive inside yourself, feeling the feelings, purging what needs to be purged, and coming out of that, wielding that sword and going into battle and thinking about how you want to take action or move forward now and beyond. There is a, you know, it's a gentle aspect. You know, we do have the sextile there to a fallen Jupiter. It's not like the best sort of influence, you know, a lunation can have, but hey, this is 2020. Let's take what we can get. So I'd say this would be a pretty good lunation for intention setting. If you like to perform any rituals around the new moon, or any of the things that you like to do with that, because our next lunation is an eclipse. So this really is going to be the last lunation that we will have for the rest of the year. That is going to be not not an eclipse and well, not impacted in the eclipse season, I should say. And yeah, it's a really good one to go into that deep dive. Mine some resources, given the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction as well, Mars stationing direct and going, right, this is my target. And using a combination of the strategic, patient stillness of Scorpio, but keeping that sharp sword and that battle-ready kind of mojo of Mars in mind as well. Okay, I do love my sword-related analogies there. So I do hope that that has, it makes sense for you at least. Now, something to note about the month of November is if you're in the USA and Canada, we're looking at the 24th, the 25th here down under, and that is when the sun moves within range of the South Node and starts to herald the eclipse season. So I'm just going to fast forward that for you now so you can see that. So it'll be the 25th here. So what happens is when the sun gets within 18 degrees of the north or south node is when, technically speaking, the eclipse season starts. So it's just something to notice there. And then of course, the first eclipse of this current season then happens on the 30th. So we start the month just, reeling off the full moon. It technically happens on the 1st here in Australia, which is why I've brought it up in this video. And we end the month on the full moon in Gemini. It's actually an eclipse, this one. It's penumbral, meaning that it's not tightly configured to the nodes. And so when it's not tightly configured to the nodes, it's less visible. So closer to the node, the more visibility. So we do have, a good 11-degree difference there. So yeah, the penumbral eclipse in Gemini. So it's a full moon, Gemini, and an eclipse. So this is going to bring a frenetic, chatty, information overload, dynamic eclipse. It's still, a full moon eclipse on the north node. So it is going to be this idea of maybe some insatiability, this desire to be highly social, very talkative. There's a real kind of airy or in the head quality about this lunation. It could be kind of hard to, get grounded or get focused. Gemini is one of those signs that is quite renowned for starting one thing and moving on to the next, and that kind of very mutable energy, that very oscillating between being very active, being very stagnant, and then back to being very active. So it can be a little bit, changeable in that way. So there's going to be a buzz, a curiosity, a sociability with this, not being grounded, being a little bit in one's head. It's also conjoined a fixed star, tightly configured to the fixed star Aldebaran. So this is a fixed star that is one of the royal fixed stars, and it is an important star, and it's in of itself is known to have quite an insatiable quality about it. In the constellational zodiac, it's located in the constellation of Taurus. But as the precession of the equinoxes have taken us through, it does sit in the tropical zodiac at about 9 Gemini. So it does have those lusty, sensual, kind of like basal vibes of Taurus, but with the North Node and the full moon there, it might really heighten the combination of that, as well as the insatiable kind of needing to know. So you might want to need to know more about a partner of yours, or a romantic interest, or a desire that you have. And it might help to look at the Gemini part of your own chart, and that might give you a little bit more insight or guidance of how this will work for you. So combining that verbal, spoken vibe of Gemini, we might get like a smooth talking or smooth communications, or, being told the things you want to hear as opposed to what you need to hear. So there's those kind of vibes there as well. So that's just, it's a penumbral eclipse. It's a full moon lunation, so it will have a little bit of drama to it. I don't expect it to be too dramatic, but that's just a few key indicators of what you might be able to experience as the month draws to a close. So that's the month of November. I hope that's given you a little bit of insight around how to plan or strategize or approach the month for you. So I do invite you to just kind of sit with that, see what it brings up for you. And of course, if you would like more information about the month, about what you can expect, and some practical tips and tricks and advice, I'd love to have you in the Golden Circle Club. So until next month, I'll say bye for now, and I look forward to catching you next time.